Okay, are folks seeing my screen?
Yes.
Great. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us for a design subcommittee meeting of the Boston Civic Design Commission. Today's date is Tuesday, September 24th, and this is session A of the BCDC Design Subcommittee. The Planning Department continues hosting public meetings in a virtual setting for the health, safety, and accessibility of Boston residents. My name is Seth Reisman, Deputy Director for Design Review at the City of Boston Planning Department. Before we proceed with the agenda, the open meeting law requires that I notify the public that this meeting is being recorded. Therefore, please be aware that Commission staff is making an audio and video recording of this meeting. Please turn your camera and microphone off if you do not wish to be recorded. For the purposes of the record, commissioners present include Commissioner Easley, Gilly Smith, Haseen, Lubenow, and Morris. Tonight's agenda will include a presentation for 17 Bradston Street in Newmarket. Tonight's meeting will follow typical BCDC Design Subcommittee meeting format, beginning with a brief presentation from the proponent, comments from BCDC commissioners, followed by public testimony. So for 17 Bradston Street, a proposed project at this location is seeking Article 80B large project entitlement, contemplating approximately 550,000 square feet of primarily commercial use, including research laboratory, light manufacturing, and office uses, as well as 204 off-street parking spaces in one building on an approximately 1.15 acre site. This will be the first presentation of the proposed project to the Design Subcommittee following introduction at the July 9th, 2024 monthly meeting. It is my understanding that there are no commissioners present who intend to recuse themselves. A reminder to proponent teams that presentations will be limited to 15 minutes, and I will give presenters a halftime warning as well as a 1 or 2 minute warning at the end. And with that, I invite the proponent team to begin presenting whenever ready.
Wonderful. Thank you, Seth. Good evening, all. D'Artagnan Brown from Embark, and I have Jim, and Erica with me from Embark, and I also have Natalie from Verdant. Thank you all for your time. I'm going to see if I can screen share. Can everyone see this? And everyone can hear me? Okay, wonderful. So as Seth mentioned, as a follow-up from our meeting back in July, we spent a lot of time with Seth, the team at the BPDA, really kind of refining the approach to the design, hitting a couple key areas on understanding what it is to propose a new industrial life science building in the Newmarket area, kind of, a little bit different than the Seaport or Kendall or other areas, and being really the first building in a true kind of gateway site to the Newmarket recently zoned 21st century industrial district. We've taken that time to kind of step back, look at the approach, and excited to share that with you tonight. This slide is really just going through the evolution, as you all may recall from earlier, and I can certainly go back and answer more detailed questions. But a quick reminder that we are fully compliant under this.
Kind of listen to a BRA hearing. It's not.
Hello? Oh, thank you. We are fully compliant under the new zoning for this area. Our site, if you can see my cursor here, really located at the northwest entry off of the corner of Bradston and Southampton in the gateway industrial within the Newmarket, kind of documented the existing conditions in and around the site, and then really looked at the immediate fabric adjacent to us within this area, and then across the street, really at the BU Medical, kind of a greater influence to the overall site approach, as we are kind of at that nexus or zone between the BU Medical as it transitions into the Newmarket. The site itself, as mentioned, is really, we view it as a strong gateway. There's amazing opportunity for visual cues from inside the building out to the medical center, the hotel, the roundhouse down Southampton, as well to back into the building. And it's well situated within a strong network of bus, pedestrian, and bicycle modes of transportation. We've kind of just understood vehicular access, pedestrian access, how that shapes truck loading, et cetera, onto the site. And then the building kind of really being first for the neighborhood is at a transition point, not only in time, but just relative context around it, with the understanding that coming off of kind of the BU medical, how it transitions into the new market, we've kind of documented through that and really see this building needing to do a couple of things, setting up not only for the immediate build, but the long-term evolution of this district. So with that, we've kind of highlighted through the uses, the hybrid industrial, the lab office, and then the mechanical above, which we'll show. And the takeaways that we got from several meetings we've had both with the initial BCDC and BPD is really understanding or looking at what a hybrid industrial building should evoke, understanding the use of brick, how that's really integrated into the design, beckoning back to the existing kind of contextual qualities, but understanding the forward kind of thinking nature of what this building should be. How does the massing and the facade expression start to engage both on Southampton and Bradston, really being a corner site? And how does the building really approach from the south, coming up of Southampton, really, making sure we hit all avenues of the building. And then with that, maximizing the porosity of the ground floor with the use, understanding the challenges we have around meeting climate resiliency, accessibility. So it's quite a balancing act in getting that right, which really ties into the open space that Natalie will address. With that, before I turn it over to Natalie, a couple of key things we've worked with great feedback from Seth and the team is really engaging that hybrid industrial, not only on Bradston, which we had here, but having that wrap around and come down to the Southampton. So both sides or both facades are activated with really having that corner expression on the ground floor be the lobby entry, bike access, amenity into for the tenant's use. And that's kind of highlighted here with those visual cues out, physical entries in, and with that, let me pop you over to Natalie.
Great, thanks, D'Artagnan. We developed a pocket plaza here, an open space, developing to create inviting areas for the building's occupants and visitors to experience. It's a buffer between that busy intersection and street. We're meeting the climate resiliency by raising that plaza 2 feet. We're inviting accessibility with all the steps and with that sloped walk. As per the plan, Newmarket, the street trees along Southampton are planted inbound of the sidewalk so they can avoid truck strikes. And it gives the pocket plaza and streetscape a nice shady environment. The streetscape public realm provides well-shaded public spaces with a variety of unique seating typologies to encourage gathering. Next slide, please. This is the Bradston, a little bit of the Bradston streetscape. And here we're showing the generous concrete steps that lead up to the building for the entry. We're showing the placement of the blue bike station, the drop-off zone, and just a few of the street trees along there that are planted in a tree trench with pervious pavers on top and structural soil beneath. Next slide, please. And this is the Bradston, the loading dock at the back of the building. And here we are showing the cool pavement coating and the pervious pavers and a stormwater planter at the end. And these are part of smart surface strategies that are being developed by the city of Boston to be implemented in developments. I'll hand it back to Embark. Thank you.
Thanks, Natalie. So moving into the actual program, as mentioned, we brought the hybrid industrial down to Southampton. We have that commercial entry lobby as discussed. And coming off of Bradston, we've managed to work with engineering to bring all of the truck loading off and back into the site under entry sequence here with access to the garage off of this curb. We are meeting the 15% requirement for the hybrid industrial, so that will continue up onto the second floor. And then we've just test fitted out a typical floor for that lab and office use as we move up through the building. Kind of quickly wrapping up around the public realm, just understanding our section along Bradston, not only meeting the complete streets from the city, but also for the Newmarket district, working with the architectural elements and tying into landscape, navigating between the grade changes from the raised entry slab to the pedestrian zone. As we move around the corner, looking back from Bradston to Southampton, as Natalie mentioned, kind of the inviting stairs up to that lobby entry with the hybrid industrial use above. And then coming down Southampton, just denoting through the accessible entry, the steps really bringing you into the from Southampton to around the corner to the entry of the building. With that, a quick recap on the uses itself. So the first 2 floors will meet the hybrid industrial with the clear ceiling heights, et cetera, that are set out at 21 feet. And then the floors above transition to the lab office spaces with the mechanical setback. Working with Seth and the BPDA, we've gone through not only really understanding the Newmarket guidelines, but have a series of quick studies that will show you that we'd love your input on. And that really,
D'Artagnan, just want to give you a halftime warning.
thank you. And that's really starting with what's called our proposed option, where we've kind of revisited the use of brick, really tying into that 2-story expression denoting program behind. As we come to the corner, having that first floor glass lobby kind of denote itself relative to the architectural expression above. That wraps the corner back, and the emphasis is really on this kind of front corner off of Bradston and Southampton. And I think one of the interesting things we've looked at is having that architectural grid expression carry up to enclose or be an open air structure to the mechanical that can recede behind as an option. And then furthering that, if you can see down at this where my mouse is middle of the page, the question around, do we carry that brick at grade? Some initial thoughts are, is it a little too heavy? That's feedback we'd like. And then another is pulling back the brick to where we had it, but bring the weight of that architectural grid down. With that, we've just demonstrated through renderings really the first approach, and we can overlay nuances to this, but this is an updated view since the commission saw it, where we've moved away from, I think, a more techier seaport look earlier to something that's, we think, much more appropriate for the Newmarket, where we have a heavier kind of grid expression, more industrial panes, and window kind of fenestration. There are a couple elements we really liked that were twofold, both in the gradiating facade that not only meets the energy code in terms of glass restriction, but really highlights this corner entry as the gateway moment into the building, which we'll show you in a second as well. Here, we've just done a snippet of another section of the building where we do have that gridded expression, open air expression coming up that could adorn the top portion in front of the mechanical, denoting through the use of materials between perforated metal, steel panels and ribs, iron spot brick at the base, kind of a glass panel with the kind of steel mullions. As we zoom into the ground floor entry, the lobby being here with the hybrid industrial above, really celebrating that use, having that be the forefront of the entry piece here, transitioning behind on these 2 floors as we move around to loading there. We brought in kind of a deliberate change in tone of material at key moments throughout the building to really bring a little bit more weight to the facade. As we come around Bradston, this is the 3rd floor kind of breakout space, so bringing the warmth of the wood, having this be a little bit more glassier, inviting relative to the structure of the building above. Flipping back down to Southampton, looking back, the thought here is to really have that lobby entry be visible from afar. Here, we could, as mentioned, bring up the open air grids, which would then step down as we move to the wing off of Southampton. On the upper floor here, we have a breakout space for the tenants. This is just an aerial view looking back, so you can imagine, just given time, I think we really wanted to get these options in front of the commission and the subcommittee. by bringing in that open air grid structure, stepping down, having the open space, kind of the brick, give relief at the corner lobby expression, tying off of that landscape entry. This is the view back from Southampton as you would engage from this entry point to the building. And I think with that, hopefully I wrapped up on time. Thank you, Seth.
With over 2 minutes to spare. Thank you.
Oh, I could have slowed down.
We appreciate conciseness here. And before I turn it over to the commissioners, I just wanted to mention one element of Plan Newmarket that we had discussed last time, particularly in relationship to streetscape strategy, was a preference in, or really focus in Newmarket, particularly on Southampton Street and the major industrial streets, to focus on the addition of landscape and street trees at the back side of the curb, not the front side of the curb along the street. So that approach is being implemented across Newmarket, whereas you see a different strategy on the side street of Bradston. And with that, I will turn it over to the commission.
I know Anne Marie and David have their hands up. I wonder, before we dive into comments, if we could actually see those options A through D kind of flash through again.
Certainly. So this we were calling, Linda, kind of the base. This was option B, where we brought the architectural grid up as an open air element to screen mechanical behind, which could either be opened or enclosed, depending on celebrating the equipment or screening it. Option C was keeping the air grid above, wrapping the brick around the full base. And option D was keeping the brick where we had it, but bringing the architectural grid and the weight of that down to grid.
Thanks, D'Artagnan.
Certainly.
Anne Marie?
Thank you, and thank you, D'Artagnan, for the presentation. I guess before we jump into the details of this, I want to sort of step back and ask a couple broader questions of your approach to the design. One is, you recognize that this site is a very strong gateway, and it's really very unique in a number of ways, both kind of its role as a gateway at the edge. It's going to be one of the first, if not the first, structures that will be, marking a transition or transformation of this district. And of course, doing so within the context of Plan Newmarket. So I'm just curious I'd like you to talk a little bit about your approach to addressing the building as a gateway, given its prominent location, particularly, at this kind of nexus of an intersection.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm also curious, as I've just been flipping through Plan Newmarket, and I've also been teaching an urban planning studio in Roxbury, so I've been familiar with some of the issues, but I noticed that cooling strategies and heat mitigation is an issue. And I'm just wondering what this development might do to address, the heat islands that are in this area.
Great questions, Emery. I can certainly take a pass at this, and we can add our team as well. So I think to your point, and I think very well outlined is this, we are treating it as a gateway entry, just given its kind of site condition, both off of this Mass Pike or connection, Bradston and Southampton. When we look at it in terms of a short-term versus long-term building, I think a couple of key things just going around the neighborhood quite a bit is just understanding really that 1 to 2 story scale that exists today. And that's why we broke out a lot of the study. If I can flip back through to really, this is what exists in the neighborhood. It's kind of very gridded brick, very defined character, and part of looking across the street at the medical. This is, obviously a lot newer in style and age. Was how do we bring qualities of both to the building? Let me go back to the building. That kind of pay a nod to what's there currently, and so that we felt very strongly about the brick coming in, being a grounding element to something rather than just having the architectural grid kind of be a full facade approach. So having that tied back to the neighborhood, playing off of the iron spot, kind of a twist to the red brick, and then taking this corner piece, and rather than bringing lobby off of, say, Bradston or Southampton, really having that be at the intersection of both. One thing we do think it will do is draw pedestrian activity really to that central entry point. And if I go back, sorry to jump around, but to just go back to the kind of pedestrian transportation access we looked at, should actually coming in off of here, we really feel that if we can address both connections off of Bradston, Southampton, at that central point, which is really at the kind of major intersection point, we felt programmatically setting the lobby there, the studies on having it more glass or not really would then kind of highlight entry point, and then that's where we feel like the gradiated facade, I'm gonna just swap down, coming up, we can imagine at night really lighting up, being a strong entry point, and really having a signal to Newmarket. The choice and use of materials, I think one thing we've gone, if you recall an earlier slide, we've gone through many iterations on kind of an evolution of that facade approach. We feel like with Seth and the team input at this point in time, we've been able to strike a balance on having something new that isn't overly curtain wall or glassy, ties in a lot of kind of the proportions that are within the neighborhood to start to shape the fenestration of the facade and bring some little bit of aged industrial character to the building without being a flat glass box. And I think as we start to, I can imagine next steps from here as you start to detail it through, looking at some of these key moments. I'm going to just jump down to one side here of maybe, a C-channel steel angle, and bringing in some of that materiality will really start to tie this together. But that's kind of been the approach to the facade with the programmatic elements behind, and our shaping of how we think this could work as a kind of gateways, signature entry piece. I hope that answered it.
I do have some questions and comments, but I do want to give my colleagues a chance to comment. Often that's where some of the richness of these conversations happen. So, but thank you.
Thank you.
David, I think I see your hand up.
Sure. Well, let's see. I mean, I would like to talk a little bit about the site and past, present, and future, as well as the building itself. By the way, a very nice presentation. Thank you to all. I think it's very clear. And there's, it's very exciting in my mind to see the opportunity for this kind of investment in this location, which I think is great. As I think we all know, this is a very challenged site currently because a lot of addiction services are offered nearby. And even though great progress is being made in managing those conditions, historically there has been a problem. And I note that even properties like the hotel diagonally across the street, which presumably is another heavily managed property, that the issues with loitering and drug use and so forth happening like literally right outside the building have been an ongoing struggle. And I want to be very sensitive to the fact that I understand there's real suffering here, and these are very important services that are being offered, but I feel like I have to ask the question about the the green spaces that are being offered right up front, which are places, as you mentioned, a lot of places for gathering. How is that something that really, on one hand, obviously bringing more people to the site, more visibility, more activity is going to help a great deal. But how is this the best place on the site for employee green space and so forth? I don't know the answer. I'm just asking that question because I know that this is a major intersection here. I do think that as much transparency as can be afforded in the lobby, from the lobby to this location, is going to be a very positive thing. So I do hope that what we're looking at here in terms of the glass, the transparency of the glass, the glass can be opaque if it's the wrong kind of glass, that there's a real sense of connection between the activity that's happening inside the building and the green space. And so I know there's some sectional changes, but I would love to hear the proponent talk a little bit about, and this might be the architect or maybe the developer, just talk about like how they're proposing to manage that situation. Similarly, I note the church site that is around the corner, which is not included in the parcel. And I'm wondering about, you mentioned that your project is as of right, which is great. I'd love to know what's as of right on that site, and how what might be built on that site potentially would impact this design, and how you've taken that into account, assuming that someday that site is developed to a higher density. So those are two questions I have just about the nature of the place. It is also a very difficult crossing point, and I don't know if, as part of this project, there are any proposed improvements, whether they be signalization or actual physical improvements to the crosswalks and so forth there that would make this less like crossing the highway, which is what it is like. I mean, this is at rush hour, this is like a really tough place. So I guess I just want to, I think there's a lot of beautiful things in this design, but I want to acknowledge that there's challenges here, and I want to understand how they're going to be addressed in the short term, short and medium term potentially. On the architecture side, I think the landscape proposal, all things being equal, is a very lovely and very good use of space. But I am, of course, concerned about, is this a place for people to sit and gather, or is this, should that maybe occur somewhere else? On the building, I think that the architecture is very smart in terms of, I like the fact that the base that you're proposing is actually correlates to the industrial uses, so that it's not just a pastiche, but it's actually expressing a change in use here. I do wonder if the way that the building breaks through it, or does that building slide through the lobby and around the other side so that it looks less like a attached facade and more like a volume that the building is sitting on. I wonder if that's something that might may be able to be explored as you develop this concept. But in general, I like the idea. I also think that the expression of the skin looks exciting. I would suggest that for me, the proposal to extend the grid up to begin the process of concealing the very significant mechanical equipment that's on top of the building seems like a really good idea, because even by doing that, the mechanical equipment is still going to rise above this. So I think that I feel like there's opportunities with that kind of an approach for lighting and all kinds of things that could enhance that sense of gateway for the building in all the times of the day when the sun isn't shining. Whereas, here, when you look to the left in this image, this area already has a lot of equipment. There's already a lot of very visible equipment. And in some ways, like the building that you see, the power plant building or whatever it is, you know, that equipment has really been expressed in a 1970s way with the red and the white and and I think that
On the far left there, David,
on the
right?
far left,
Yeah, right
the
here.
far-
So-
yeah, that building.
Yeah.
I mean, that building clearly reads as an industrial building with, you know, significant mechanical uses. In my mind, either this mechanical uses on the building on top of your proposed building should either be very celebrated or should be screened, like you're suggesting, in favor of a gateway treatment. And I prefer the latter myself. So I think that what you're highlighting with the little circle feels like the right direction for me. But those are the questions and thoughts that I have. It looks, I think, like a potentially very exciting project.
Thank you, David. I can take a pass at answering some of these questions if that's okay.
Sure.
So starting off, and I know our team, clients in Verdant have really thought about the front entry plaza and how much of it is there or not. And it's really a balance in our minds. And I'm going to try to go to, it's really a balance in our minds of getting up to the site, just given the heaviness, both in kind of vehicular and pedestrian activity on Southampton, having a little bit of relief of the building facade off, because we can imagine, you know, a fully occupied building, there's going to be a lot of foot traffic coming to the site. And so part of that was, you know, how do we balance this, pull it back, but not create an overabundance of space for unwanted activities? And so, you know, you know, whether there's actual tables and chairs, and that's a spill out of the lobby, a lot of this is based around bringing in a little bit of landscape green. It's not overly done, getting site access up, you know, and then we're looking at 8 to 10 feet of kind of circulation space around the building. We are, and my team can correct me if I mess this up, but we are kind of, in terms of Newmarket's setbacks, we are kind of complying to the broader setbacks that they set up for the district. So we're not asking for any relief there. I think we're kind of in line with what we could see coming down long term. And I think that's the thing we all have to keep in mind, is the interim or the current condition is tough. We've all been there, you know, it's unfortunate it exists. We would hope in time, as, you know, projects like this come about, it starts to, you know, clean up the area. And with that in mind, we're just trying to strike that really the question you asked is how much public space do we have or not? And I think if, you know, if we were to pull the building 5 or 10 feet out, I just get a little weary that somebody coming to the building has to immediately get off the street and enter, rather than have a moment or two to step up, walk, and then enter the building. And I think also, you know, just from a perspective view, let me pop down to
And D'Artagnan, just to confirm as well, the building is raised for resiliency, right?
Correct. Yeah.
And from the city's perspective, we much prefer resiliency strategies that raise the site and the public realm, so that we're not relying on a in-building solution or face of building solution for resiliency barriers.
100%. Yep. So that you said it better than I did, Seth. Thank you. Let me go to that. So that's where we jump up to elevation 19.5 coming off, and able to navigate that grade change both through you know, the 2-foot incline that we have to get up. Looking at the view for a second here, I think, you know, it's really not, when you start to look at it in perspective, I don't think it's a ton of space. But I think if we were to pull the building right up to the front, it just starts to feel very heavy on the site, perhaps.
Yeah, and I'm not suggesting
Yeah.
that. I wanted to understand. I mean, you are proposed, there were tables and chairs, there is seating.
Yeah,
I do think this is an area that's going to require active management.
yes. Yeah.
20, like all the time. So how is that being provided for? Is that something are there like people standing at the top of the stairs, or is there some way that
Yeah.
is done with a lighter touch? I'm just curious about all that.
Yeah, certainly. And maybe Josh can answer that in a second. I think in terms of open space, a couple other things we've done, David, is on the third floor, we have a nice breakout space. And then on the upper floor, let me just flip to the rendering back here. This whole section is kind of also outdoor space for, where's a better view? Sorry, for this as well. Which looks back over Newmarket. So we're setting up, entry plaza, third floor, and then top floor.
While the slide is up, could you talk about the site that's next door?
Yes, so this site here, I think Josh, you know this well, but we have approached them. We did a study with trying to incorporate the site, but my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, Josh, is there's something like a 20-year long-term lease that's on the site. So it's we don't see it changing hands anytime. I know Josh and his team took a hard run at trying to acquire it, but with the lease in place, it doesn't seem to go. Rick, that's correct, Josh, right?
Yes, yeah.
So what could be built there? Something the same height? And what are the setbacks?
Don, if you want to answer that.
Yeah, sure, David. This is Don Weiss,
Hey, Don.
from Council of the Project. Hi, how are you? The site is within the same Gateway Industrial District that we are. They have the same 140-foot maximum height that we do. There's a 10-foot setback off Southampton. Otherwise, it's really a fairly limited set of dimensional restrictions. So there could be a relatively small footprint, more of a point tower here. As D'Artagnan mentioned, we tried very hard to consolidate this site for obvious reasons, but that car wash is apparently a pretty lucrative business and maybe pretty low cost to run. It seems to be off the market for potentially a couple decades. So by the time that site would come into play for redevelopment, who knows? But potentially a small footprint tower of the same height could be developed on that site.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
David, are you all set with those?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, David. Shauna?
I think it's on mute, Shauna.
Thanks for the reminder, and thank you for the presentation. Natalie, also thank you for the presentation. And David, thank you for asking a number of questions that I was going to ask, one of them being about the setback restrictions on the garage. So it is an interesting, maybe if we could flip to page 14. And thank the president, was a very strong presentation, both landscape and architecture, although I find the landscape drawings a little challenging to read. It took me a while to spend some time understanding it. And I understand the challenges of this site, and it's difficult to fit design for today and design for the future. I think the idea of active management is really important. And I also think the feeling of openness, while the feeling of welcoming is also really important. And that's a pretty tough thing to hit on this project. So I'm actually going to focus on a number of little details and not just being picky, because I think that they impact the overall experience of the project. So one of the things, and not all of these things have to be sort of discussed and looked at, but to me, it looks like there's a pinch point between the blue bikes and where the industrial entry comes out, the angle once the bike's there. And the solution, of course, is to slide the blue bikes forward. But then how does that impact your trees? Does that, does that still allow for both of those trees? But more significantly is really the stairs and the furniture of the stairs. So in this scheme, and we can look at the views in a second, it looks like there's a tree and some seating stones at the top of the stairs, which of course, from an accessibility perspective, we can't do. A blind person can't walk, would never know that the stones or the trees are there. So either that has to move or the stairs have to change. Likewise, and we can look at it in the view in a second. Likewise, the seating steps that are in, I like the idea of the seating steps, the seating platform in the stairs, but maybe, is it 30?
Maybe I go to 13 for a
30.
second just to see the full plan, if that helps.
Yeah, so you can see the seating steps on the seating steps at the top of the stairs at the corner, and the tree there. And then the other one, the seating steps are in, no, there's there's a bench in the stair itself.
Yeah.
Yeah, which we can see on one of the views.
Yep.
So again, maybe we could click to that view. Is it 30 or 31? Not
Yeah,
sure which is
it's
the
30,
zoomed in one.
30. Hold on.
Right.
Oh, I gotta zoom out.
Yeah, so again, if it's part of the stairs, a blind person isn't going, they can follow the handrail up, they won't know. I just got out of an accessibility charrette yesterday, so maybe that's why it's on my mind. But the reason I'm saying these is because if those 2 points were closed down, if you kept the seats and then closed the stairs, you wouldn't have this open feeling. So I think it kind of has to go one way or the other, but I think having it does, you can't do both. I think that so that's something I think just to think about going forward, because I do appreciate both of them. I appreciate the interest of the furniture, kind of the actual stair on the bench I think is a little unsafe the way that it is, but that detail could be resolved. And I think in the landscape plan there's planting and a tree at the top of it. But again, I think just thinking about these details as you develop it, because it impacts what the overall welcomingness and openness of this, of the entry is. So those are the main things that I wanted to talk about. The reason I was interested in the building adjacent to it was because of the tree planting, because you've got a pretty narrow space there. It goes down to like 6.5 feet, and up to about 10. So having trees that will, and if it's a 20-year time frame, the trees may be sacrificial, but they'll have to be pretty tough if you think something will happen there next door, which it may never happen. So I think just keeping that in mind, that that whatever they are, and then again, it's going to depend on the species, that how they impact the windows up above. If you really, if you do want them, I can understand it's probably blank at the industrial level, but at the, the next floor above is really going to depend on the height, with having the trees planted immediately adjacent to the building. So it's really kind of those picky little details that I wanted to focus on. I think, David gave a big sort of more introduction to, I'm sure, the thing you're much more aware than us of how do you do this really delicate balance of creating it an open, welcoming place and making it, safe for yourselves and for others as well.
No, thank you. Oh,
Sorry, go
I'd
ahead.
just like to respond to that. Thank you so much
Please.
for your comments. I really appreciate them. D'Artagnan, if you can turn to page 56. It really outlines what we're doing with the trees on the site and how we're shading I think we're shading 14% of the site. Yeah, that's the page. And that these trees wrapping around the building are more of a hedgerow, and they're narrow species and they're variety of species. So that really it's part of the heat mitigation of the site. I just wanted
Yeah,
to
and-
point that out. But yeah,
Well, and
no,
I
I
think-
agree
I
with
think
you.
they're- They're important.
Yeah.
I think that
Yeah.
that's. Oh, the one other thing that I think you might want to consider, I know the decision was that that the trees had to be back of a sidewalk. I don't know if there is capacity to have other planting or even upgrade the paving at the front of the sidewalk, because it feels a little bit like, yeah, we're just leaving it all down there, however it is. It feels a little abandoned down there. So I think that's something that you should see if you have the spatial capacity to do.
That's great. Thank you. There's a lot going on that corner underground, and that's just another reason to keep the trees back from it. But we could certainly look at an opportunity for some kind of planting down there. Thank you.
I was just going to add that I think the way I would summarize my comments that were maybe a little long is my issues really aren't with the architecture of the building, which I think is heading in a good direction, and I look forward to seeing more, and the landscape for that matter as well. It's my short-term concern about the nature of the site and the people that are there, and the idea that I'm imagining that a big part of the synergy between building a building in this location would be with Boston Medical Center. So what is it like to cross from Boston Medical Center over to the site with you know, all the folks that are also there for services? You know, right now, I don't think the solution is to have, you know, a police car parked on the street with its, you know, which is what it is now. There are police cars parked on the street. It makes me wonder if there is actually an architectural solution, like a something that helps animate that plaza, maybe a very nice little kiosk that is a security kiosk that allows, you know, either the police or the proponents, security folks, to be on that site in a pretty little structure that is friendlier and reassures pedestrians, and is basically, you know, out there on the street rather than something that's in the lobby. And it could be an architectural opportunity, it could be a landscape opportunity. So that's, you know, one thought that I have about, you know, maybe yeah, something sculptural, something beautiful that's out front that is also serving other purposes, so that it doesn't feel like a ad hoc solution at the end. And then the long-term problem, which is about what gets built on the car wash site, you know, and how your architectural solution is addressing that. I do think it would be useful to see a gray mass of what would be permissible as of right on that site, to understand the space in between your building and that building, and what measures may be necessary to plan for that long-term future. So I guess that's what I'm saying, is the sort of short-term nature of the connections and the pedestrians and safety and security, and then the longer-term notions of what happens when this neighborhood really takes off. Do you have a building that is really difficult on, you know, 40% of its perimeter?
Thanks,
Could I
Dave.
also add one small point? I think one strategy, because there's also, I forgot to mention, there's also benches on Southampton Street that are actually pretty hard to see from the lobby right now. So I think being sort of strategic with your overtly welcome gestures, like the benches. I think they're underneath the trees. No, I think they're along, yeah, that's where they are. So that's actually what I mean. I think it's a little bit hard to read the plan. It might be good to, but I think those ones are actually, depending on where the kiosk is, they're a little hard to see because they're not by the stairs. They're sort of tucked around the corner. So that might be, again, it's a really tough challenge to design now, and and for later.
You know, one last suggestion is Kirk Sykes, I believe, is the owner and developer of the Hampton Inn diagonally across the street. And, you know, he's also a member of the commission. And Seth, I'm wondering, Seth and Linda, I'm wondering, you know, if having Kirk's eyes on this might not be a good idea, because he knows so much more than any of us do about the site and the challenges and so forth.
I'm trying to remember if he's recused, David, but we can
Oh.
look into that.
Yeah, certainly make note of that and reach out if he's not recused.
Anne Marie, I see your hand up. If I could make just a few comments, and then I wanted to also ask Catherine if she wanted to, and we all got started a little bit late, so maybe we'll try to wrap up around 6:15 or 6:20 also with some public comment. Overall, I think that the design has improved so much since we saw it in July, so I really appreciate all of the work and integrating our comments from that full commission meeting. And I've just kind of ticked off a couple of comments, some of which my colleagues have already brought up. The first one, I'm just going to go in order of the presentation. So Bradston Street is something that we would normally call like a surface road, right? And so as David has brought up, we have this really unique pedestrian crossing, really challenging pedestrian crossing situation. And we also have kind of this arrow building, and we've got entries on those chamfered sides, and then we've got an entry into the industrial area that we're looking at here. So I think it would be really helpful if we see you again in subcommittee to have a circulation diagram that really talks about who's using those entries and kind of what those views are and how folks get across all of the Southampton, Mass Ave, Melnia Cass, Bradston, and even out the back, which I hadn't even noticed the name of that street, Gold Street, until today's presentation. Do I have that right? Gold Street, which is where you have the truck drop-offs. So I think that would be really helpful. And then for the open space, Shauna and David have done a great job talking about that. I think that's woven into this challenge of getting pedestrians to and from the building. And so understanding how to make those sight lines and desire lines as clear as possible, while also thinking about the safety and security, you know, maybe as part of that diagram could be really useful. I do like the idea. Normally, I don't like when open space is claimed at upper levels. But in this case, the idea that we're seeing here, which is on the north side and then also on the east side, east-ish side, makes a lot of sense to just give the options on such a tight site. I think that makes a lot of sense to me. I wanted to talk slides 22, 24, and even this slide start to talk about the industrial skin and the lab skin, and then also the mechanical space. For me, I really like the logic of calling out these different uses. And I had just a couple of thoughts about that. And I'll start with the industrial. I think there are some really clever nuances that you've expressed here with materials. I think there's actually a band, you know, where we're looking at this diagram where industrial is banded blue, that you actually have that iron spot brick kind of metal kind of color coming across that industrial, and then also again at the building entry. And I wondered, I actually like the idea, I guess it's either your base option, which is kind of what we're looking at here. Yes, to me, and then wrapping around onto Southampton makes a lot of sense to me. I think what's missing for me is the way that the chamfer, that the facade actually hits the ground there. Because you have that building entry and a little bit of an overhang here, I feel like we lose the groundedness of this particular kind of bevel on the building. Yes, this is a great diagram to show that. So I'd love to kind of see some options for how that can hit the ground in a little bit of a stronger way. It feels a little bit understated, especially because kind of the column treatment right above that is kind of more pronounced and wider, and then becomes narrower as it hits the ground. So I'd love to see something brought down to the sidewalk a little bit. On the penthouse, I think I have a slightly different perspective than David, though I think that our ideas are similar. So I actually favor having the screen for the mechanicals set back. When the facade was actually extruded or brought up to that penthouse level, for me, it kind of messed with the proportion. Yeah, and this slide shows that. And I'm wondering if the screen, when it's pulled back, so not on this option B, but maybe on the base option, I've forgotten what C and D are. Yeah, this is a good one. If that screen can just be higher. And then that gives you the sense of kind of that parapet level, then you step back and then you have the screen. And to me, that, I don't know, there's just something very strong about having those kind of 5 parts, right? The base and then the 4 parts and then a strong kind of setback there for the screen. So just something to be thinking about. On slide 32, which is looking at Bradston Street, I hope. So I understood, and I think it's really clever that you were able to get the truck traffic back onto Gold Street, but I was confused about why there was still this garage entry. So that's for the passenger cars?
Vehicular, correct.
Okay, vehicular. So the vehicular entry is this garage in both directions?
Correct, that's in and out.
In and out, yeah. And then the trucks come around the back in, because they can't actually get all the way down that alley. It looked like it was actually truncated.
Yeah, so trucks.
Landscape verge.
Yeah, Linda, trucks would enter here.
Right.
And then let me go to the plan.
And then they have to turn around, right? Because it looked like the landscape wrapped around.
No, so they actually, what we've done it is, I can't draw on this, but they
right there, they're truncated.
Yeah, but the loading is here. So
Yes.
they can actually go here and then back in and then go out.
Right.
Yeah, so we're not doing anything.
We actually have a drawing in the appendix that from the engineers that did the
Page
circulation
number.
studies. I forgot to. So.
67.
Thank you.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I was understanding that and where the passenger vehicles
Previous one.
Okay. Yeah, okay, so they come into Gold, they come in, then they back in and then come back out. Okay.
Yeah.
And then just 2 other comments on slide 34. And I think some of my colleagues have talked a little bit about this view. So for me, the rest of the building feels very resolved. This view along Southampton feels like it needs a little bit more simplification. I think part of it for me is that you have a penthouse that doesn't fully extend across the building. And, you know, the biggest challenge is that you're working with an L-shaped building here. So I can understand the challenges that poses for you. But you have the penthouse screen kind of truncated, and then you've got this kind of extrusion of the facade that partially disguises this outdoor terrace. So there's a stepping down there, but it's not really clear what's happening, at least for me. So I would love to have the team look a little bit stronger at this and how you might simplify that, either call out kind of the step down, or maybe there's another way to resolve the complexity there.
Yeah.
And then while we're looking at this, I have no idea if this is possible. I think we're all scratching our heads about this car wash. Totally understand that there's nothing you can do at the moment. And Mimi was reminding us the other day that they have these kind of balloon people, right? That kind of are very animated on that site. Jim's laughing too. But I don't know if there's any possibility of actually thinking about the materiality of that small structure. You've got that iron spot brick that creates a very neutral background to this building, and there might even be a simple way to think about roof color of that small building or
To change
facade
it on their
color.
building?
Yeah, just in a way to almost bring it more compositionally true while they continue to have that site. So I'm sure you've had lots of conversations with them. They may not welcome that, but I think it would make a huge difference actually, and might be worth just an additional discussion. So, but I think that the building is so much improved. Thank you so much for all of the changes you've made. I want to see if Catherine has any comments, and then Anne Marie will come back to you and then open it up for public comment.
Thank you, Commissioner Eastley. I think Commissioner Hassan has pretty much answered everything I was gonna say. But I do want to I just want to double down on something particularly on the ground floor, about this balance of public realm, open space, and the entryways. I'm probably more deeply concerned about foot traffic and ebb and flow if things are happening around that area to those that are entering that building for work, engagement, play, and then the public also engaging, and just really trying to understand more deeply how you all are thinking about that and managing the expectations of that kind of balance of engagement in that space. And even from a safety, perspective, how are you all thinking about that in this design that you all have presented? But other than that, there's definitely been a lot of growth and development since the last time I saw you all. So thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. I don't know, Josh, if you want to jump in and maybe talk about kind of security management, views on managing the plaza would be great. And I think David had a couple great comments, and maybe we celebrate that through a sculpture moment or physical to allow for that use. But Josh, have any other comments?
Sure. Hi, Josh Fetterman with City Realty, the property owner and developer. We've owned here for about 6 or 7 years now, and we're also founding members of the Business Improvement District. So we were on board with Sue Sullivan and others' efforts from inception. So, we definitely understand the current condition very well, and deal with the challenges on a daily basis. So, I think a lot of the comments we heard today around, I guess, a little further review on what we've proposed, but, working with D'Artagnan and his team, we thought this was a good balance between kind of open space and entry, and that glass facade, also transparent glass, which David highlighted, we think is an important part of it. And then, just as noted, it'll be a fully managed and activated building. We anticipate the need for additional security, call it, evening shifts. Right now, as part of the Business Improvement District, we've implemented security patrols, also integrated camera, and then the need for considerate lighting around the property. I mean, it is an industrial area where there's no residential contemplated in the district, or at least in this section of the district. So really just making sure that as we get further in the process, we're taking a good look at lighting, camera coverage, and kind of the operations and management that will be special to this location, at least for the short term. I mean, we are obviously very hopeful that, together with efforts by local groups like the BID and citywide, that we slowly see improvement and investment in the area, and we are hopeful, and I hope you see that here.
Thank you, Josh. Anne Marie, I wanted to give you a minute or two, and then we'll shift to public comment.
Yes, and I'll try to keep my comments short. I realize this has been a long, a long process already, but I guess I have two things. David has seen, has questioned a couple of times, or has highlighted the complexity of that intersection, and I just want to reinforce that. And it, quite frankly, makes me question the placement of that main entrance. That this is a very, it just that intersection feels very exposed to me, and is that the right place? And I realize this is a big question, so I'm sorry to kind of throw this in right now, but I just had to mention that. I suggest when you bring it back, a few people have mentioned the kind of the legibility of the plan, so it would be really helpful in the next iteration to have a site plan that shows the building and the proposed changes in context. And then and I think going back to the placement of the main entrance, when you show the rendering, it's close up, but again, I can't help but visualize standing as a pedestrian on that corner, and just, again, it feels exposed. I can imagine it being windy and cold on a cold winter day, or very hot with all that paving around it. And I understand there's plans for more vegetation, but I still have concerns. And then secondly, Linda, you mentioned when you highlighted slide number 2, and there's that diagram that spelled out the different areas. I wonder if there's an opportunity to connect that with David Hassin's comment about thinking about how and where you wrap the brick around the building. I think there's an opportunity there, and I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne Marie. Appreciate it. I don't see any other commissioner hands up. Seth, do we have any public comment?
So at this time, we'd like to invite any members of the public in attendance who may wish to contribute public testimony to raise your digital hand, and staff will call on you. If you are calling in by phone, press the number 9 on your dial pad to activate the raise hand function, and dial 6 to unmute yourself. Please state your name and any relevant project affiliation information, and please keep comments to 2 minutes. Do we have any public testimony today? Okay, seeing no hands, I will close out the public testimony portion of today's conversation and turn it back to the commissioners, and sort of hearing the gist of the conversation tonight, with lots of great comments on how this can continue to evolve, but also that there's been significant improvement since the last time this was before the commission. Wondering if folks feel comfortable with the idea of moving this towards full commission again, with any provisos for the team to work on with staff in service of that.
My gut is that we would benefit from another subcommittee. I mean, I think we're almost there.
I agree with you, Linda. I think a more robust evaluation of the circulation, entry, all of that, as was described, would be, I think, and again, if Kirk could be a part of it, that'd be great. But I think that would, and I think Anne Marie's point about the question of, what would it mean if the entrance was a little further down that more private street to the left, is not something that occurred to me, but I think is a really very interesting idea. I also want to say that, just so that we're not chasing tails here, I think Linda's comment about the setback screen and the impact on the proportions was a really good one. And on second viewing, I think that should be something to be pursued. Basically, that idea of the screen being set back, being taller, and then how that wraps around and cleans up the L. Feels like, given the gateway nature of this building and its prominence, that feels like an important thing. And perhaps we could see a couple of views of that from longer distances. Is this something you see from 93 coming into the city, et cetera? Because, I mean, that's the gateway condition, right? What's it look like, driving off of 93 and coming into that intersection? What do you see? And what does it look like at night? And and that feels like another design opportunity to explore.
I really like that suggestion. I too agreed with Linda's suggestion that you pull back at the top. And I do think, you know, there's been a lot of commentary about the role of this building, you know, serving as a gateway. So I'd encourage the proponent team to think about, you know, David mentioned a few cases, but there are going to be multiple angles, I believe, from which this building is important. I think also just going back to Melnia Cass, that I think this, and I haven't had a chance to dive into it, but I'm just kind of curious what the vision is to transform Melnia Cass into a more pedestrian environment. You know, what opportunity again does this first building have to signal, to mark, to set the stage for an environment that could be more conducive to pedestrian activity, keeping in mind how one addresses, manages, you know, the many uses and activities and challenges of the site.
You know, a project that comes to mind, not exactly the same condition, but an interesting condition, Catherine, I'm thinking about you here, which is that the Liberty Mutual building is on a very prominent corner, and the entrance is not on the corner. There's actually an art piece on the corner, which is quite an interesting piece, I think, and is something that signals gateway, but doesn't necessarily invite gathering right at that place. And the entrance is slightly down the block, and is has a, you know, a drop off and a very kind of comfortable situation. When I put Anne Marie's comments together with, like, you know, I know, yeah, thank you. It's a very strong corner that kind of, you know, meets the street, if you will. It feels like a gateway. But I do wonder if maybe there's some lesson there that could potentially be applied, and that gathering place or the green space is actually a little bit slid down the street, and it isn't necessarily a place where the public and the tenants mix, but it's actually more oriented towards the tenants, and the light and art and all that's really gateway is something else. It's just a question. You may look at it and reject it, but you know, I look at that bike room and I ask myself, you know, should the lobby be there?
Yeah.
And it's
yeah, or even, yeah, I think that's a question. That's a good comment on where it occurs on that relative to kind of the ground floor. You know, does it come through this expression? Is it adjacent to it? I think that's something, you know, and to Josh and the team, does it make sense for the program as well? But
well, you know,
that's
think a lot of
great-
people are going to be coming to this place by Uber or by
yeah,
other,
which I drop
Yes.
off.
you know, and that corner is kind of like a difficult place to
Well,
drop.
that's a great that's really great feedback. I think we'll certainly look at that.
And I think when you come to subcommittee, just having that diagram, you know, that
Yes.
we requested, where are all the crosswalks?
A
You know,
pedestrian
what are those
path, yeah.
desire lines, how does that line up with the existing entries, and then how it might
Yeah.
slide around? I will just add that, you know, having the open space on that south side or south-ish side, I think does make a lot of sense. So as we're thinking about maybe shifting entries and thinking about the open space again, I would just encourage you to be thinking about that kind of southern side to make it more hospitable in the shoulder seasons for sure, anyway.
And actually, this leads into the one thing I wanted to understand better, obviously not tonight, but also wonder about the opportunity and relationship is the nature of Bradford Street, if it is a super high speed street, or if there's some way of mitigating it in a certain way and make a connection to the big green trees. Because to get over to the medical center, it's a couple of layers, right? You have to move across the street to the island. and which actually has really significant trees. And then another island. So, but the street, this Bradford, or is it?
Bradston.
Sorry,
Bradston.
Bradston Street itself, what is the capacity, what is the traffic volume on that street? And is there a way, does it make sense to tabletop it? Does it make sense just for a certain area, or some way of making that crossing a little bit less, onerous and more pedestrian feeling? And particularly, I was thinking that with the entrance in either location, I think that could be an interesting thing to look at.
Certainly.
Well, the advantage of having one project is that you guys got to stay an extra 30 minutes. Thank you. Thank you for your patience.
Hey, folks, before we break, just one last very quick comment. Just a context point for those who haven't spent, like I have, a lot of time in Newmarket. There's been a lot of comment about the CAS and the connector and pedestrian connections. This area, well, there's been a lot of focus on pedestrian safety, long overdue in the city. That's one focus of traffic engineers, but the other focus is throughput. And it should be underscored that we are in a center of the city that's very focused on automotive throughput, for better or for worse. We're near one of the main connections to one of the main regional highways. 93 is just up the road from us. And Newmarket itself is a distribution business focused area. It is about trucks and noise and vehicles coming and going. Again, the word throughput is sort of a focus of the area. So we're fighting against that a little bit, trying to kind of tame and pedestrianize our site and create that appeal. But just want to point that out. There's been a lot of concern about pedestrian around here, and we have limited ability probably to affect that because we are just in this area where pushing cars and trucks through is so prioritized.
I think that's a super good point, which in my mind actually maybe reinforces the notion of looking harder at, I'm sorry, I don't know what the name of that side street is that we're looking at right there.
Bradston.
Bradston, as making that as nice a place as it can be, and letting the face on letting that face actually be quiet, the face facing the trucks and all of that stuff be actually a little bit quieter, potentially. That's something to
think through.
I would agree. I
And-
had the same reaction.
Can
Yeah.
the proponent team correct me if I'm wrong, but is Bradston Street and the stretch of it controlled by Mass Dot?
Yes,
It is.
that's correct.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No, it
Well, Seth,
it
that's
just
a good way
it
to
adds
end
a
things, isn't it?
complication to the approach of both, streetscape, entrance, all of that. So I just wanted to point that out, that I think we'll work with the team to take that into account, and I also have to deal with the jurisdictional issue.
And Seth, it's also a one-way street coming off of Southampton as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that surface road, yeah.
Yep.
All right.
Sorry,
Yeah.
can you all hear me? I
Yep.
Zoom quit for a second.
Yep.
Yeah,
Okay,
I just wanted
well.
to point out that jurisdictional issue as we work with the team on addressing these concerns.
Certainly.
Thanks, Seth.
Thank you.
Okay, so with
All right.
that, thank you all. I think this was a great discussion, and we are headed in the right direction, and we'll see you at the next design review subcommittee.
Would it be possible, Seth, to offline just hone in on a time for that sooner than later, if possible?
Yes, let's definitely connect about that.
Wonderful. No, thank you. All the comments were very helpful, and we look forward to continuing to shape this and getting your support.
Great progress. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank
Have
you,
a good night.
everybody.
Great.
Have a good
Thanks.
night.
Good night.